All right, we're good.
Hi, my name is Jessica Olson. I am giving a presentation on the history of the Indigenous Peoples of the North Americas. Who am I? I am a Red Lake band of Chippewa, might be something you know, or Ojibwe might be the other word for it. But we actually call ourselves the Anishinaabe. That is our word for our people. What should you call us? You know, there's a lot of words for the indigenous population, including Native American and American Indian, along with many not so nice terms. Now, we usually prefer to be called by our tribal names, but unfortunately, half the time you don't know what they are. But natives is fine. Indigenous is also a great term for us. Reason why American Indian, we're not in India, right? So we don't really care as much for that terminology, along with the term American, mostly because does anybody know where the word American comes from? Amerigo Vespucci, who came over with Christopher Columbus. So, it's kind of a thing, can be a little touchy with Christopher Columbus and everything. So that's why I say native, indigenous, very safe bets. Why is indigenous history so important? Well, we came here around 30,000 years ago. There's many different time frames. I mean, we say about 30,000, they say around 15, still longer than 1492.
Just a little bit.
Just that. And we have our own culture, our own languages. We have our own belief systems, our own spirituality, our own religions, and it's very important to us. And American history tends to not really speak about it. And if they do, it's in about like 2 lessons, and it's not something you can cover in 2 hours. We're gonna do a pretty brief one here just because it's just too much to cover, but I at least can kind of give you the highlights. And anyways, those that don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. So right now you can see a map. This is the map of what has become known as the United States prior to pre-Columbus. So as you can see, we really divided ourselves into different regions: the Southeast, the Plains, the Great Basins, and there was just tons of tribes. These are more the they have the Chippewa or the Ojibwe, which is here. That's my tribe. The Sioux, everybody kind of knows them as well. That's Lakota or Dakota. And they really were just spread everywhere. Now, after Columbus, or I should say after the United States, this is the current map of native land, the red parts. As you can see, we have trunk. If you can actually see on top, this is kind of pre-Columbus. This is after we were kind of forced westward as colonization started to happen. And then with Andrew Jackson, he said that you can have all the land past the Mississippi. We'll just keep keep the east. As you can tell, they did not keep their word. So as I said, in history timeline here, arrival around 30,000 years. 1492 Columbus came, and probably there was a lot of wars after Columbus, between the native tribes and the colonizers. I'm not going to really go into depth because there was a lot of wars. Some against the French, some against the English. We joined whoever we thought would keep their promises. It didn't work. In 1830, though, was probably one of the major events that happened, which is called the Indian Removal Act. This is done by Andrew Jackson. And that is the promise. He said, if you give up all your land in east of the Mississippi, you can have the West. And what they did is they kind of forced this on them. So has anybody ever heard of the Trail of Tears?
Mm-hmm.
So this is a result of this act. So they forced the Muskogee, or known as Creek. My uncle is Creek, and they were forced out of Florida all the way up to Oklahoma against their will, usually forced marching. Of the 15,000 that went, 3,500 died. The Indian Appropriations Act, that one is when reservations were created. So basically they knew they weren't gonna actually follow the treaties that they had signed saying that you keep your land, we have ours. So they said, here, why don't you go on what's called a reservation? You can farm this land and it's all yours any way you want. Does anybody know why it was kind of hard for natives beyond just because it was farming? We're not farmers.
Yeah, it's not in the culture, right?
No, we were hunter-gatherers. So we basically were forced to learn to farm because they took the land that was pretty much the best hunting gathering spots and forced us into the West, which is a little more farming. Another part about this that is really interesting is these reservations were actually huge. We're not talking the modern reservations. They were actually very, very large and were built by treaties. So the Treaty of Fort Laramie, anybody know Custer's Last Stand?
Mm-hmm.
So Fort Laramie created what was called the Great Sioux Reservation. This was up in the Dakota area, in some Montana, and basically said, this is your area. It's all your land and everything. Well, that didn't last very long. Does anybody know why? What is not precious to the native peoples that are precious to metals? Gold was found in the Black Hills. Yep. The Indian Appropriations Act, gold was found in Georgia and Florida. So it's basically any time they find something on our land that they want, they force us further west. So yes, so basically a Lakota chief named Sitting Bull took a stand and said, you cannot pull us out of our land. We have a treaty with your government that says that this is our land, and fought back and they won. Very surprising because it wasn't very often that we'd actually win a war, or a battle I should say in this aspect. But we did win because there was 5 different tribes involved in there. And it's very hard for our tribes to group together because we are actually very separate people. I'm like, we have very similar characteristics, but it'd be like somebody asking France and Germany to team up and fight some invading armies. Back in the day, that wasn't really the case. So yeah, Sitting Bull was really important to the native peoples. He was a very honored war chief. It's on the next slide, but he died in December of, I think it was 14 years after Last Stand, so 1890. What happened? Wounded Knee was the response to that. So we'll get back to there because Then first native school, I should say Indian boarding school opened in 1879. Now, has anybody heard of what an Indian boarding school is?
Yes.
Yep, so this is, we'll go over it a little bit more later. It was a place where they were trying to stamp out native culture. And as I said, in 1890 was the Wounded Knee Massacre. About 14 days prior to the Wounded Knee Massacre, Sitting Bull was killed by the US government. He was getting arrested, but in the crossfire, he got killed. There was no attack. He was literally just sitting and leading his tribe. He was not in war or anything. They were just going to arrest him because of Custer's last act. And Wounded Knee is one of the worst massacres in U.S. history. 150 people died, native peoples died there. About 24 of the army. Of those 150 people, around 75 of them were women and children. Now, people think that's a long time ago. It never happened again. It's not that long ago. It really isn't. It's only 130 years. So it gets a little less massacring once we get into the 1900s. So in 1924, natives are finally granted American citizenship. So prior to 1924, we weren't even seen as American citizens. But again, we still had to be born in the US. And we were granted those rights as a citizen, supposedly. The Voting Rights Act is actually when voting became more possible for natives. Because prior to the Voting Rights Act, they would implement rules. You have to be able to read and speak English. You have to, they'd have tests to make sure that you have the right stuff to vote. Voting Rights Act affected not just natives, not just blacks. It affected everyone, and it helped them saying you cannot discriminate based upon their culture and the color of their skin. So that was really an important part of history for natives as well. It still wasn't enough though. We're still discriminated against. So in 1968, they had to write another act called the Indian Civil Rights Act, saying that natives are granted all constitutional rights. So even though we were citizens, we didn't have the constitutional rights covered by the Constitution. And that still wasn't enough. Not till 1978 did we get the right for religious freedom. Because Native religion is very earthbound. We like using different plants in our celebrations and in our connection with earth. And they were banned by the United States government. Pretty much everything about being a native was banned. You couldn't vote, you couldn't speak your language, you couldn't dress like a native, not till the 19th century. And even then it was like they were piecemealing those rights to us. There was so discrimination that they wanted to make sure that we knew they were less than them. Prior to Black Lives Matter and everything like that, there was what's called an American Indian movement. This was in actually the 1968 it was founded, which is actually very similar, has a very similar message, which is it was founded in Minneapolis to fight police brutality and racial profiling. And I don't know how familiar you are with the AIM, but they had, they're the ones that occupied Mount Rushmore. And an offshoot of them also took over Alcatraz for a while. So it's pretty interesting. They were seen as too radical by natives. But honestly, compared to today's standards, they weren't violent. They were just trying to get recognized by the US government that they broke the treaties that were between the native peoples and the United States government. And we needed that recognized and reparations to be made. So in 1972, there was a movement called the Trail of Broken Treaties. So people went from Western California all the way to DC, trying to show that, hey, we're serious. These treaties were made between our governments. They are legally binding documents that you broke. And the president at that time, who I can't remember, apologize, said, okay, we will investigate your claims and we'll get back to you. Not much happened. But Nixon, actually, I apologize, it was Nixon. They might not have found any just grounds for it, but he did help start the process. Basically, he was trying to acknowledge that there was some issues between the US government and Native peoples, but there wasn't too much movement yet. And it's pretty interesting because nowadays, there's a lot more movement. We've had Standing Rock, we've had the Keystone Pipeline protests and everything like that. And now the Secretary of the Interior is Deb Haaland, who is Native American, an enrolled member. And she is the first cabinet member that has been Native American. So it's really interesting and really awesome to see that we actually finally have some representation within the cabinet. So interesting facts. I don't know if they're interesting to me, they might not be as interesting. What do Presidents Abraham Lincoln, Andrew Jackson, Teddy Roosevelt, Thomas Jefferson, and Martin Van Buren have in common?
Massacres?
A lot of it is massacres. It is a very poor relationship with natives.
Relationship with what?
President Abraham Lincoln, most people don't know this. What massacre did he oversee? You might know it.
The 38?
The 38.
Yep.
The Mankato Massacre. He signed off on it.
When did that happen?
1868.
Yeah. 1862, December 26th.
Wasn't it 4 days before? 4 days before the Emancipation Proclamation. Yeah.
Which, people love him and everything, and it's just like, the Emancipation Proclamation didn't actually do anything right. It wasn't until the Civil War that actually something came about it. Andrew Jackson, Trail of Tears. He was also behind the Louisiana Purchase. So Louisiana Purchase was a huge tract of land in the southern United States, and they bought it from the natives for some blankets, medicines, and about $500. Thomas Jefferson, founding father. He has us in the Constitution as savages. It's written in the Constitution, as well as the Declaration of Independence. Martin Van Buren, he, not as well known, caused over 1/4 of the Cherokee Nation to die in a forced relocation. That was about right after the Trail of Tears. It's not as well known. Now, some of those names you kind of recognize too from the national monument. So what national monument is in front to the Lakota tribe?
Oh, well, that's one.
Mount Rushmore, where Abraham Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt are also on. Now, Teddy Roosevelt, great guy, right? New Deal, awesome. He also established a national park system. Where do you think he got the land? He took it. Yeah, Mount Rushmore is huge, hugely debated. It's basically, it's like somebody went to the birthplace of Jesus and desecrated it and put on a rival statue. Because that was the place of the Lord's creation. It was a beautiful mountain. And I didn't write it down. So basically some guy heard about this, that it was under debate, that they wanted this land and it was very sacred to them, came up from Virginia and started constructing this monument. He didn't actually ask permission, he just did it. So what did natives do in recompense? They built the other crazy monuments, yes, in South Dakota. So I really would recommend anybody who has kids to go to South Dakota. There's so much Native history there. It's amazing to go there. And as I said, I don't really visit Mount Rushmore, but I'll go and visit Crazy Horse anytime. Then there's also the Wind Caves, which is a national park, which is also another really historic Native place. And you already answered, where was the largest mass execution in United States history? That was Dakota 38, and Abraham Lincoln oversaw it. And then we already answered what historical documents justified the taking of Native lands. The Declaration and the Constitution. Okay, I had a couple more topics I wanted to go a little bit more into, of course. Indian boarding schools. They were founded in 1879 by the church. Mostly Protestant churches, not Catholics. The first one was Carlisle Indian School, and their policy was to kill the Indian, save the man. So what did they do? They said you cannot speak your language. You cannot dress your culture. You cannot have your name. And as you can see in the second picture here, that is the same person. Prior to school and after. All traditional religious practices were banned. And they were forced to convert to Christianity. It was very similar to military schools. They marched everywhere, everything was on time. It was not a place for fun or learning. In the United States, more than 973 children did not go home. And that is a low number. We have not looked into it more. There is nobody really even talking about it anymore. A few years ago, they did have some information that came up in the news about it, but I haven't heard anything since. So yes, it was over 60,000 children removed from their homes and sent to these schools and forced to just try to be white. Some of the people, and this was not even that long ago, 1879, these schools were open until the 1960s. Some of the people that attended them were the Navajo wood talkers. So just think, World War II could have been very much different. One of the topics I haven't touched upon, but I wanted to definitely talk about is MMIW. What it stands for is Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. 4 out of 5 Native women have experienced violence in their life. In 2016, there were over 5,700 reports of missing and murdered Indigenous women. Compared to the national average, we're about 2% of the population. It's a ridiculous percentage compared. The Indigenous population has one of the highest rates, and no one is talking about it. Most people don't even know about it. You hear about human trafficking, but you don't think about the United States. You think that's somewhere else, but it's not. It is around here all the time. And because of the lack of support for Native peoples, we tend to be more poor. We tend to be homeless. We tend to be not have the support because we don't really live on reservations anymore. Only about 22% of Natives live on reservations compared to the urban area. But we don't have that support for our culture within the urban areas as much. So a lot of it is fragmented, and it's much easier to get us to experience violence. Now there is a short video, I'm not gonna play it here because we could theoretically have the time if we wanted, but I wanted to do question and answer. But if you want, send me or give Amy your email and I can send her the presentation. She can email it out to you. Because this video is very poignant. I recommend anybody who's interested in just current Native issues to watch it because it's very sad. Just a quick little thing, Native American leaders. Does anybody know who that is? Sacagawea. Yeah, first U.S. coin for a woman was Sacagawea. Went really far. She led the Lewis and Clark mission through the Louisiana Purchase and helped interpret along with guide them. Sitting Bull, as I said, he was famous for Custer's last stand, and his death basically ended up in Wounded Knee. And Deb Haaland, I mentioned her earlier. She is the first Native American cabinet member. So I just thought it was pretty interesting to see the progress we have made. Any questions?
I have so many about the missing and murdered Indigenous women. I mean, what do you think is behind all that? I mean, why do they not have the resources to investigate and?
I gotta go back to that slide. So basically, the preconceived notions that the police have about Native culture, we're alcoholics. We go back to the reservation. People think that when you go in to the police and you're like, hey, my friend went missing. They're like, oh, well, they're probably just at the bar. Or they probably just went home to the reservation. But we're not all on reservations. Our home is here. Our family is here. Why are you saying we went back there? Or we don't. Not all of us drink, and not all of us drink to excess, just like any other culture. We're just less believed. The discrimination against Native women is staggering because it was interesting, like when the American woman went missing over in Europe. It was all over the news. Oh no, she went missing, she's nowhere to be found. Well, in that time, probably at least 5 Native women were missing and nothing was ever said. It's just discrimination. Plain old.
So local, well, and state and federal law enforcement agencies are just dismissing these reports.
Yes, of the, what is it? Of the 5,700 reports of people missing, only 116 of them made it into the national database. And that was just 2016.
Do they know who's committing these crimes again? I mean, is it,
Human traffickers, a lot of it.
I was just gonna ask, so is that kind of the concern that from the Native community, that it's with human trafficking, is that these women are disappearing and probably being trafficked, but there's.
Yep, and there's no follow-up from the government.
And isn't there like I heard somewhere on a podcast, I think, about the relationship between like reservation authorities and the state police that they're in. Reservations can be like safe havens for white men who have created or who have committed horrendous crimes. They can go to the reservation and the state police can't or won't do anything because they don't have jurisdiction.
Yeah, there's some of that. Not every tribe is, or not every reservation is like that. Most of them are not sovereign. Indian reservations fall under the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They're in charge of maintaining and not very well. Let's just put it that way. Our health is declining because the Indian Health Board is completely underfunded. It's really sad. As I said, more has come out and been more vocal in the last few years. And I do feel like we're gonna take a step back in the next couple years too, unfortunately. Nothing against people's choices, but the worst governor in the United States history for Native peoples, one of the worst, is Christy No. And she is now going to be the director of Homeland Security. So it's actually a very scary time for us right now, because we feel like the relationships that we've started building with Deb Haaland are going to take a very giant leap back. Because Christy No does not like us.
yeah.
She's not allowed on
Yeah,
any
she's
reservation.
Fan.
She's got awful. So it's really sad. It's very concerning for us. Because people think race isn't an issue anymore. And it is. Just because you don't see it or experience it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. We had a group of young Indigenous youths get a reward where they could go to a hockey game in South Dakota. And they went, and they were excited and everything in Rapid City. Even though they were sitting quietly enjoying the game, somebody in the second level doused them with pop. All of them. Because how dare they come to an event where they were not welcome? That was just less than 10 years ago. So, 20 years ago I was getting questions, do I live in a TV? No, I live in St. Louis Park. So it's definitely a hard time right now for everybody. But I just wanted to kind of shed some light on the current Native issues and then the history that led to it. Because we're still here. People think of Natives and they think, oh, casinos, they got lots of money. Anybody been to the Red Lake Casino? It's not very nice. And it's like way apart. We're the second poorest tribe of the state. The first poorest being White Earth, which is my grandpa's tribe. Metawankatan is what you think of when you think Natives. Metawankatan own Mystic Lake. There's only about 130 members of Metawankatan. I got like 130 members of my family in Red Lake, so there's a big difference. So I just wanted you to understand that not all tribes are created equally or treated equally by the government. And we need to really acknowledge the pain that has been caused in history by the trail of the broken treaties. And what's interesting nowadays also is Red Lake is getting back Upper Red Lake, because that was removed from us by one of the governors too, for hunting and fishing, and now we're getting it back theoretically. I don't know how it's gonna go with everything happening, but that was an agreement that was made. But, yeah, any more questions?
How, like, you know, and the history, to learn about the history is so depressing, you know, and yet here we are. So like today, how would you say is like white people who would be useful to show up to support you?
Learn really about how you can be an ally. Because like right now, as I said, missing and murdered Indigenous women is a really important topic. You know, it's loud, and we need anybody who can kind of share it. Like, you know, just, you know, don't acknowledge that we all have unconscious bias. I do too. Some of the most racist people I know are natives. And
Wait, they're whole people? They're like entire humans that aren't just like mystical?
I know, right? So yeah, I think a biggest thing is just open up that conversation with people that are different than you, because you can learn so much by reaching out. You know, a lot of mission trips that I've been on have been to the Native reservations, and I enjoy building those relationships, because it can't just be go over there, teach them all about Christianity and leave. No, we have to learn about their culture and how they live, and how our beliefs are and coincide, right? Because sometimes they might not say they believe in Jesus Christ, but they believe in a greater being than themselves, and they believe in goodness. Isn't that enough?
I recently read a book called To Vanish Forever. I encourage everybody to read it. It was about the banishment removal of
Can you
Bill.
We can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I recently read a book called To Vanish Forever. It was a book about the banishment and removal of Ho-Chunk people from Minnesota, from the Mankato area. It was really enlightening. It was something that I had never heard about. Even though I grew up in South Minneapolis, where I probably attended Phillips Junior High, where I probably had a little bit more exposure to some Native history and culture than most Minnesotans do, and I had never heard of it.
It's pretty interesting.
It's sad. It made me so sad.
I mean, has anybody seen the movie Killers of the Flower Moon?
Yes.
That's a true story.
Read the book.
They found liquid gold, aka oil, on native lands. So they were becoming rich, and the white members of the town were like, oh, we want some of this money. So they married the native women and then killed them so that they could inherit. So, that was a couple hundred years ago, I think, too. You know, and actually that was the century, wasn't it? And so it's a really sad relationship, and a lot of it is greed. Yes.
I walked down in the Fort Snelling State Park, and there's an area in the park that was served almost like a concentration camp when the women and children were moved from the Mankato area to Fort Snelling during the time of the massacre there. And oftentimes when I'm down walking in that area, there were pieces of red felt and ribbon tied to all the trees. And I've been on a discussion that Jim Bear from the Minnesota Council of Churches has done.
Yeah.
And he explained about the MMIW and how the red that people tie on the trees then is an indication and a remembrance of the Indigenous women that have been murdered and are missing. And I thought it's such a powerful visual when you're in the state park and you see all of that red in that area.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, the red face handprint across the mouth, because nobody talks about it, but it exists.
Isn't there a day of,
Yes, there is a day. I don't remember what it is, but they do usually do parades for it too.
and then people wear
Red, yeah. Yeah, that is the color for the MIW movement. Any other questions?
Has there been, do you feel like, has there been any improvement between the relationships between the tribal governments in Minnesota and the state government? Now we've got a lieutenant governor who is native.
Oh, yeah, as I said, we started getting some of the land back that was taken for farming. Reservations tended to be the least farmable land. So they're saying, you have to be farmers, but we're gonna give you the worst land in the United States. But, and so they kept taking and taking, and they always took the best land. So it's really interesting that we're actually starting to get back or getting paid back for the land that was stolen. So it has been improving this. And I'm hoping maybe that it can keep improving, but it really does depend. It's political climate's changed, right? Like nothing, it's gonna be slow improvement anyways, like nothing's gonna be fast. But yes, reparations are starting to be made, which is nice. It just doesn't, the amount of full-blooded natives in the United States can fit on a 747. And that's down from millions from that first picture that I had of the map that were there. So it's pretty sad. Great.
We do need to wrap up today, but Jessica, thank you so much for preparing this for us. Yeah. We will be having more conversations. We'll have one next month on December 15th. Jessica will be leading that as well. And then into January, we will have a couple more. This is a conversation that is ongoing and open. Like you said, Jill, Jim Bear Jacobs hosts sacred sites tours, which takes you around to really sacred sites among the Dakota people. And if you would like to do one of those as a group, we can arrange that. If you want Jessica's presentation, I will send that to you. If you want more information, I will gather that and send it to you as well. Thank you for coming and listening and learning. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.